All right, good evening, Algonquin College. Can you folks hear me okay?
Yes, Stephen.
All right, hi there. Yeah, if you haven't seen me before, my name is Stephen Fagin. I'm the curator here at the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas, and we are coming to you live from the first floor of the former Texas School Book Depository building. We're actually up against the windows tonight so you can see all of the rush hour traffic in downtown, but we're right here at the corner of Elm and Houston where the assassination took place 53 years ago this month. We're looking towards the anniversary. This is our third of 4 connections with you folks, and tonight is absolutely my favorite program that we offer. It's called Living History, and it gives me a chance to talk with someone who lived the experience of the assassination weekend and give you folks the chance to ask him some questions as well. We always have a different guest, and I'm joined tonight by John Sparks, who is a veteran producer and on-camera anchor, just a veteran of local DFW media outlets. He's also done media work in New York City, and so he's got a fascinating career in journalism. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but we're really going to go all the way back to 1963 when you were just a youngster in high school.
Wow.
And I always like to start these programs by giving you guys a sense of what our guests looked like back at the time of the assassination. So we're going to put a picture of John up on the screen. There he is. And you have not changed a bit from the high school picture.
If I only knew then what I know now.
Now, John, you were a Fort Worth native.
Yep.
So your dad, as I understand it, was pretty politically active, and as a result, for a young person in high school, you were politically astute, more so than your classmates. Tell me a little bit about your political awareness in the early 60s.
My father was a Democratic Party precinct judge, which meant that, like on election day, he would go to the polls and he would run the elections for that particular precinct. And his brother was a local labor leader, very involved in the Democratic Party. Former House Speaker, the late Jim Wright, was a family friend of ours. And when I was a little shaver, Lyndon Johnson was Majority Leader of the Senate, and when he would come to Fort Worth, Johnson would stay at the Hotel Texas, which is, by the way, is where the president stayed the night before he was shot. And but Johnson would stay there, and my dad would take me down there, and we'd go down to in the basement where the barber shop was, because Johnson would always get his hair cut down there, and Dad would, he'd talk to Johnson and say to me, and I'm, 5, 6 years old, he said, "Son, that man's going to be president someday." And you know what I know, I'm 5, 6 years old. I said, "Yeah, right, Dad." And Dad was right. I mean, little did we know the circumstances. And then I had my uncle that was a labor leader. He was a Johnson delegate to the 1960 Democratic Convention, which of course is where Johnson surprised everybody, and Mr. Sam enticed him to take and accept the offer that Kennedy had offered to be on that ticket. Yeah. So we got quite a bit of history.
Now, speaking of Kennedy, I'm putting a picture of the president and first lady on the screen there. Now, Eisenhower was the oldest president in American history up to this time.
That's true.
Kennedy was the youngest ever elected. As a young person, what did you make of this handsome new man occupying the White House?
What's really interesting, the picture you see here is black and white. And in our world back then, television was black and white. The newspapers, of course, were black and white. Now, Life magazine has a few color pictures, but the picture you have is black and white. I remembered Harry Truman when he was president, but the really Eisenhower was the first one I truly remembered. When the President of the United States, President Eisenhower, would address the nation, I mean, he'd come on television and the world would stop and you'd pay attention. And I was talking to somebody just today, and I can't remember in 8 years since Obama has been president, I don't think, except for when he announced about bin Laden had been shot and shot and killed, I can't recall when President Obama has ever addressed the nation from the Oval Office. But anyway, President Eisenhower was like your grandfather. He's an old guy, bald-headed, and kind of a grandfather figure. And then all of a sudden you get John Kennedy in 1960, who is young and full of vigor, which is a phrase that he used to say. But the picture's black and white, and I'll jump ahead a little bit in that I got to see the president the day he was shot. I was at the Hotel Texas for the breakfast, and the man I saw there was in color. I'd never seen him in color before. I mean, he had ruddy cheeks. He's a big man too. And Jacqueline Kennedy. I mean, she was, on television and in the picture she looked very petite, but she was very attractive woman with an attractive figure. But she was a large woman, and that surprised me.
You were also a high school student.
And I was yeah, but she was very demure when she did the tour of the White. Oh, looky there.
Yeah, well,
they can't see it. Okay.
We're about to put it up there, though.
All right.
Yeah, but there's a picture here, and this is part of your band. This is the trumpet section, and you are the young man with glasses, the only one with glasses there on the second row, farthest to the left on the second row.
Yeah, the horn-rimmed glasses there.
Yeah. So this is the Eastern Hills High School Band trumpet section.
That's the trumpet section.
And there's a story about how you guys ended up being the band to perform at the breakfast, because it wasn't originally supposed to be the Eastern Hills High School Band.
It was supposed to be TCU, Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. And the event itself was had a dual purpose in a way. In those days, Fort Worth, Texas did not have a diverse economy, and most everybody in Fort Worth worked for General Dynamics. Before that it was Convair, Consolidated Voltaire, an aircraft plant. In fact, today Lockheed owns the bomber plant. But at any rate, during those days, and my father worked out there at the time, they had bid on a plane, building a fighter aircraft that became the F-111, but it was called the TFX. That stood for Tactical Fighter Experimental. And Boeing was the other competitor on the bid up in Seattle, Washington. And the economy was in such straits at the time that had Fort Worth and General Dynamics not gotten that contract, you could have rolled up the carpet and the city would have gone under. Well, Jim Wright, whom I mentioned before, with Lyndon Johnson's help, had persuaded the president to get behind General Dynamics on their bid. So General Dynamics got the bid, and as a thank you, Jim Wright persuaded, and there you see Speaker Wright there. They can't.
You can see it. I'm in a circle.
Yeah, that's Jim Wright.
Jim Wright, the Fort Worth congressman, later Speaker of the House.
Great fella. And at any rate, he had persuaded the president to make a trip to Texas, he and Lyndon Johnson, in Fort Worth. The Fort Worth leg of the trip was to thank him for his support, because without it, the city would have gone under. The other thing, as many of you probably have studied and know about, was that the election was coming up, the election of 1964. And there was a huge internal fight within the Texas Democratic Party between Governor John Connally, who was a conservative Democrat, and senior United States Senator Ralph Yarborough, who's standing next to Speaker Wright, who was very liberal, and it got personal. They wouldn't even speak. It's as bad as in our American presidential race these days. I mean, these guys weren't breathing the same air, and so the other part of the trip was that Johnson told Kennedy, if you're going to win re-election in '64, no Democratic president has ever been elected that did not carry Texas, and so. You need to come down here, and we'll sit these boys down here, and we'll make nice and get them straight and get them on the same page, and we'll go down to the ranch and we'll drink a few Pearl beers and we'll get everything squared away. So that was a twofold premise of the trip. But I digress. TCU, Texas Christian University, was to be the band at the breakfast, and there got to be a little rumbling about, was this a political event, or was this an official visit by the president? Now, the truth is, it was the first official visit by a president of the United States to Texas since 1948, when Harry Truman came in as the sitting president, but he came around to campaign in the election of '48. Now, Eisenhower John Kennedy had come to Texas campaigning before he was elected. After he was elected, he did sneak into the state. Sam Rayburn, former Speaker of the House, had passed away, and the president attended his funeral in Bonham, but it was not he just came in and went out. So this is a big deal for a president of the United States to come and visit Texas. And so, but because of the ramifications of some people saying it was a political event, the chancellor at TCU, he began to get a little defensive. Some of his crowd was saying, I don't know if you want the TCU band to be there and necessarily endorse the president, a democratic function. My band director, a man named Ronnie Martin, who had gone and graduated from TCU. I'm at Eastern Hills High School in Fort Worth. Ronnie Martin was over at the TCU Band Hall. It was Thursday afternoon. That'd been Thursday, November 21st.
Right.
Well,
the day before.
Yeah, the day before. And he overheard a conversation between the band director, Jim Jacobson. He was waiting outside his door, and he heard Jacobson talking to the chancellor, and he realized what he was hearing was that they were canceling out and the chancellor of TCU would not let the band appear at the breakfast. So Mr. Martin, Ronnie Martin, being thinking on his feet, he had a friend in the Secret Service, and Mr. Martin had been doing some Democratic Party politics. So he went around, got to a phone, and called his friend and said, "You don't know it, but you're not going to have a band tomorrow. I got a band. Do you want a band?" And the guy thought, okay. So then Ronnie Martin had to go back to my high school, convince the principal, Roy Johnson, and Mr. Johnson said, "Well, now, is this a political event or what?" And Mr. Martin very coyly said, "Well, he is the President of the United States." And so Johnson has the phone up, and he says, he's about to call the administration building to get permission. He said, "We'll do it." So he said, so I get a call. I get a call. The loudspeaker comes on in the classroom. I'm a junior in high school, and all band members report to the band hall. And so we go down to the band hall. We didn't know what it was. We had a football game supposedly going to play Friday night, but why would we be calling out a class for. So they start passing out this music, "Hail to the Chief." And Mr. Martin said, "Tomorrow morning, you're going to show up here at the school at 6:30. We're going to get on buses. We're going to go down to the Hotel Texas and play for the President of the United States."
Wow. Extraordinary. You did not find out about that until Thursday afternoon.
That's right.
Wow.
That's right. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
We have some great pictures to show you from the ballroom, this Chamber of Commerce breakfast. So here on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see President Kennedy there in the background at the podium speaking. And on the very, very far right-hand side of the screen, it's probably pretty hard to see, but that is where the band is. And I'm going to zoom in on the far right side, and if you look really closely, you can just make out some of those shiny tubas in the background, and that's one of the only pictures that exist that show any portion of the Eastern Hills Band. Unfortunately, they never appear in any of the TV footage. There's no close-up pictures. But you were there that day and shared in that remarkable experience. I'm guessing "Hail to the Chief" was a pretty easy song.
Oh yeah, you played "Four Ruffles and Flourishes" is what is played for the President of the United States, and then "Hail to the Chief." And 64 members of the band, and they lined us up against that back wall in 2 rows, and Mr. Martin stood on a chair, and he was looking over at the kitchen where the Secret Service guy was going to give him the high sign when the president would walk through the doors, and we'd play "Hail to the Chief," which we did. There is the local independent station, KTVT Channel 11 at the time, did the live pickup. It was broadcast live, the breakfast. And you hear the announcer mention the Eastern Hills High School Band will break out playing "Hail to the Chief." And so that's, I guess, the best documentation we have that we were there, other than my memories.
Well, we're going to actually look at that moment. The crowd is cheering pretty loudly for the president, so you can't really hear "Hail to the Chief" that clearly, but you are hearing the smooth trumpet sounds of John Sparks and the Eastern Hills High School Band. Let's take a listen and a look. All right.
Here comes the president.
Pause that. Wow. An extraordinary moment for you to get to see the president, but also play for him at the same time.
It was.
You've already described what he looked like in person, but just give us a sense, sitting there at the far back of that ballroom, just what that experience was like when the president spoke.
Well, we didn't get to see him as he walked in. We're having to watch the band director who's leading us playing Hail the Chief. And then we got to sit back and watch, and even from back there, again, as I described him, he was in color. He's almost larger than life. And we also waited. Jackie had not come down, and she was late. And so when she finally came in, where we had been rehearsing, did a lot of show tunes back then, and played Everything's Coming Up Roses for her when she came in. But it was really something to see them. And we're again, you saw from the photograph, we're at the very back there, back against the wall. But after the breakfast, we got to go out on the street, and I was within 4 or 5 feet of the president. But there he is at the speech, and I, of course, was very attentive to what he had to say because he praises Jim Wright. He also, Jackie Kennedy was very popular at fashion trends. I mean, here was a young woman, instead of Mamie Eisenhower and her little bun hairdo, you had stylish young Jackie Kennedy, and he started out by saying that he often tells people that he was the one that accompanied Mrs. Kennedy to Europe, to France. They made a trip to the continent, and then he said, turning to President Johnson, said, "Nobody wonders what Lyndon and I wear," because all the ladies wanted to wear what Jackie wore.
Now, it's worth noting, John, that while the entire ballroom was munching on steak and eggs, they didn't feed the band.
No, we didn't get a thing. But our drum major, Vicki Reese, after the breakfast is over, the president leaves, Mr. Martin said, "Go down on the street and you can see the president." And Vicki went up to the table and she stole the roll off his plate. He didn't eat much either that morning. Yeah. And she kept it for 40 some odd years till in a refrigerator. It finally disintegrated into black nothingness. But there this picture here, that's a pretty good view of what the president, I could have taken that picture. I didn't, but that's how close I was to him. It was amazing. No security like we see today. And I'll never forget it. I just won't. It's because, within a few hours we're back at school and we get the word he's gone to Dallas and he's dead. And here, at that young, tender age, I had not experienced death. I had one of my grandparents had died, but here was somebody, and 2 weeks later, by the way, there was a guy in the band that committed suicide. But it seemed like, this ushered in everything.
Unrelated to the assassination.
Unrelated. Well, there's another story, but if anybody's a conspiracy buff, I'll tell you that one too if you want it, but it's not really related to the assassination at all. I
want to put a picture up here because this is on Main Street during the Dallas motorcade, and you can see thousands of people. It was estimated that about 200,000 turned out in Dallas to greet the president. John, you were very politically astute, so you were certainly aware of some of the hostile activities in Dallas. Did you have any concern about the president's safety that day?
Not really, although it's really interesting, as we were waiting for the president to arrive in the ballroom, the talk was about assassinations. And we're just, we're kids at high school. But ironically, if you go back and you watch the broadcast of the KTVT announcer who's trying to wax and fill time waiting for the president to enter, what's he talking about? Not only is he talking about the route that the president's going to take, but he's talking about presidential assassins too. It's uncanny, the foreboding of it all.
It's interesting. This rarely gets broadcast, but that he actually cites William McKinley's shooting in 1901 as the last presidential assassination, not realizing that a couple of hours later the next assassination will be in the history books. It's an extraordinary moment. If you ever have a chance on YouTube to look up that TV footage of the Fort Worth breakfast and hear the announcer, it's really is remarkable.
Certainly is.
Take us back. You said you went back to school. How did you find out about the shooting?
Went to American history class, and that was the fourth period. We changed out of our band uniforms and got our jeans, and it's fourth period American history and Mr. Mitchell, and we had a split lunch period. it was an hour class. You go 30 minutes and you go eat lunch and you come back and finish the class. Well, at the lunch, Mr. Johnson, the principal, again interrupted the loudspeaker and said that he knew many of the band members had seen the president that morning, but they had just gotten a report that the president had been shot in Dallas. And we're sitting at lunch eating, and then he turned on the radio, and we heard then the confirmation that not only had he been shot, but he had been shot and killed. And for the rest of the day, we continued to go to our classes, and you'd go to class, you'd pass, they had 6 periods, I guess it was, finish up with the history, and then I can't remember, English was the last class. I can't remember the one before I had for that, but
it was a long time ago.
Long time ago, yeah. But anyway, we would go and they would play the radio coverage over the loudspeaker, and everybody was just in silence. You'd pass in the hallway to go to your next class, and everybody was just, and then we went home that evening and glued to the television coverage, which is phenomenal.
This isn't Eastern Hills. This is actually North Dallas High School, but I would assume that at campuses all across the country, scenes like this occurred where the flag was lowered to half staff. North
Dallas High School, as a friend of mine, Billy Kennedy, who was a junior at North Dallas High School. I didn't know Billy then, but Billy got to go down and see the president in the motorcade on the way between Love Field and downtown Dallas, and Billy's friend was the nephew of Dallas Police Chief Curry, and Billy actually got to shake Kennedy's hand when they had the motorcade stopped, and but that's Billy's high school there.
Yeah. And he has an extraordinary story because he ended up in the emergency room at Parkland when Oswald was shot.
Yeah, Billy saw both ends of the story. He got to shake the president's hand, saying, "Well, my name's Kennedy too, Mr. President." And then on Sunday morning, he's playing touch football at Lee Park, breaks his collarbone. They wheel him over to Parkland, and they're working in the ER on Billy. And all of a sudden, the doors swing open. Here comes Oswald on a gurney.
Yeah, extraordinary. We've done an oral history.
Yeah, Billy's a great guy.
That's his story. Now, give us a sense, as a young person in Fort Worth, the reputation that Dallas had. There was already competition between Fort Worth and Dallas, but Dallas's global reputation suffered a great deal. What was it like to experience that?
Well, a few weeks earlier, about 6 weeks, I think it was 2 months, 6 weeks, Adlai Stevenson, who had been the United Nations ambassador, and actually he had been the Democratic candidate against Eisenhower in 52 and 56, was spat upon in Dallas. Dallas was very conservative, very right-wing. General Edwin Walker lived here. He had this group called the John Birch Society, very ultra-conservative. It was kind of an atmosphere of hate. Fort Worth was, the cities are 30 miles apart, and then there wasn't anything really between the two cities. Today it's just solid, but back then, Stephen, Fort Worth was a cow town. It was on the Chisholm Trail, had the reputation. It was called Where the West Begins, and those of us from Fort Worth, Dallas was where the East peters out. And so it was night and day, and the political atmosphere was entirely different. But Dallas was a pretty tense place during those days.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel any sympathy for Dallas saddled with this reputation, city of hate? Did you feel like the city deserved that kind of reputation?
No, I even then it could have happened anywhere, and I resented the fact that there were national commentators that were pointing their finger at Texas and at Dallas, and Dan Rather, who later became CBS anchorman, and he was a correspondent. He was here for the assassination, and he had done a story. It's become legend around here that it showed a grade school kids cheering, and Rather said in his thing that they were cheering when they learned that the president had been assassinated. It was not true. The kids were cheering because their school was being let out because of it over here in Dallas. And Eddie Barker, who was a news director over at Channel 4, kicked Rather out of the newsroom. Yeah. And boy, it caused a lot of tension between CBS in New York and the local affiliate.
It almost got physical over that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to this day, I've talked to Rather a number of times about this, and he always wants to tell his side of the story. Eddie's dead now, but anyway, there are a lot of stories that sprang up, became legends.
Well, this is a great segue because speaking of news media, you had a remarkable and long career in news media. You were at the ABC affiliate WFAA on and off from about 70 to 91, something like that.
Yes, yeah.
And during that time, you saved some extraordinary footage of the assassination. I'm going to put a little beauty shot of this collection, which we are so fortunate to now have in the collections here at the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. But what you're seeing is the original 2-inch videotape of the ABC affiliate, WFAA, their coverage of the assassination. And John, you saved this. Tell us that story.
Well, I had first I was a junior, between my junior and senior year at the University of Texas. I was an intern at WFAA that summer of 1968, and saw this footage. I saw that we had about 35 or 40 rolls of 2-inch tape. What you see there in the shot, that reel in the middle is an hour reel. It weighs a ton, by the way.
It does.
And Channel 8 in those days was a production house as well. In our studios, we taped commercials. Most of the commercials were taped in the studio. You didn't have the small remote cameras, and you had some film production, but at any rate, because we were a production house, we had about 40 or 50 hours of brand new 2-inch video stock. And Mike Shapiro, the general manager, when things started coming down, he said, put it up and record everything, because most of the coverage was originated out of our building. And so anyway, I discovered this stuff, and then when I went to work full-time at the station, in '72, I believe it was, the LBJ Library was created. They decided they would donate the footage to Harry Middleton in the LBJ Library. So it goes down there, and then somebody had the idea they wanted it back. And it came back, and it wasn't soon thereafter that I'm walking in the back of the building, and all the tapes stacked up there. It's on dollies, and I asked the security guard, what's the stuff doing back here? Oh, they're going to throw it out. Well, I had a conniption hissy fit, and that's Texas this is history, And I told the manager, I said, you can't do that. That's going to be valuable, because in 50 years I'm going to talk to a school in Canada and tell them a story about it if you don't watch out. But anyway, I got them to save the stuff, and it was preserved, and we later made dubs of it, and really, I guess, Stephen, now it's an icon really for you guys, but because now there was no 6th Floor Museum, and they've done a great service, by the way, in what they do here, folks, and that is history. But the coverage for 4 days, you did not have cable television or satellite. In Dallas, Texas, you had NBC, ABC, and CBS affiliate and independent. I'm trying to think. I don't even think we had UHF then. We had a PBS station. They called it ETV back then. But at any rate, for 4 days, unheard of. Nothing that you saw, no commercials, but constant coverage out of Dallas and Washington of the assassination, the president's service, and of course what happened on Sunday morning when Ruby shot Oswald. I mean, it was phenomenal.
Well, history owes you a debt of thanks, as I've told you many times. On this footage that we now have in our collection, and had John not saved it in the early 70s, we would not have an on-camera interview with Abraham Zapruder taken just an hour or so after shooting his famous home movie. We have the first interview with the Newman family. There's hours and hours of footage of Dallas Police Headquarters, where you see Oswald being marched back and forth. Essentially, much of the coverage that you now see included in documentaries around the world, a lot of that originates with these Channel 8 WFAA tapes. And there were no dubs back at that time, so if these tapes had been destroyed as they were intended, all of that footage would be lost to the ages. And so it is extraordinary that you just...
I'm just glad I stumbled on it. I'd had a fit if I'd known that they were going to... I mean, when I found out, it really bothered me. But
Now, as you mentioned, the museum here, which opened in '89, and I'm going to show you a picture inside our exhibits, and we're fortunate to have the Channel 8 collection along with 50,000 other artifacts. But John, back in the 80s, when the museum was coming together, you actually helped out with some of the footage. Tell us about that.
Well, Robert and Cynthia Mondell were two filmmakers from Dallas, and they were commissioned to put together some of the exhibits when the museum, the 6th floor, first opened. And I guess because I kept the stuff from being thrown out, I got stuck with being the curator or whatever. Anyway, I had all the stuff. I made sure that it didn't go back to get thrown out in the trash anymore. And in 1983, which would have been the 20th anniversary, I persuaded the management to take that footage, and we boiled it down, and over a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night, we boiled down 40 hours of footage to about 20 some odd, and I persuaded them to run it overnight just so that people could experience what I had experienced in the 1960s when it actually happened, and watching it as it came down.
Right.
And but anyway, I got involved with the museum because in those days because of helping out with the exhibits, and I was aware of. When I did this special in '83, I had logged all the tape and knew where all the shots were, and so the Mundells and Alan, I think I said to Robert, Alan and Cynthia, I was able to point them to what I thought were some of the better things, and they used in some of the exhibits that you all had.
The museum was a controversial project because many felt like not only should there not be a museum in this building, but the entire Texas School Book Depository should be torn down.
I think the assassination could have happened anywhere. But Dallas, I will tell you this, and I was a native of Fort Worth, but spent most of my life in Dallas, Texas, and it is home. But I will tell you this, that Dallas is very aware of reputation. I joke, but sometimes it's a joke, sometimes it's not. Very image conscious. The Dallas Cowboys, by the way, they became America's team. Dallas glommed onto the Cowboys because they started winning because this was something positive that they could talk about instead of the assassination. Right. And so you had that. Dallas was all about image, and boy, the image took a hit when the president was shot and killed. And so yes, you're right. Let's level the building. We don't want anybody. It never happened. Well, it did happen, and what they've done here is a marvelous job. I don't know if any of you have been to Washington D.C. to Ford's Theater where President Lincoln was shot, but they did I thought a wonderful job. For years, Ford's Theater was a private theater, but it had finally. Nobody wanted to do anything there, and so the federal government bought it. For years, it was a warehouse, stored old documents and stuff. And then finally, somebody said, "Well, let's spruce it up and let's try to make it look like it did when President Lincoln was shot." And then in the basement, it pales in comparison to what you've done here, Stephen. But I think they've done a nice job of trying to document the conspiracy to assassinate President Lincoln and all. And you can go across, only in America, across the street. I don't know, again, if any of you have been there, but I took my daughter there years ago. And right across the street from Ford's Theater, you can go and you can see the room where Lincoln was taken, and he was laid in a bed, and the pillowcase is still there, and you see the blood on the pillowcase and all. And here it was, this is where the President of the United States breathed his last, and it shares a common wall with an Arby's roast beef sandwich place. Yep. Only in America, but
we don't have an Arby's here next to the Texas School Book Depository, fortunately. But it is interesting. You mentioned D.C. Here in Dallas, you ultimately ended up working at the ABC affiliate, the NBC affiliate, and the CBS affiliate. And then you went to New York working for NBC. And you were in New York during the 9/11 terrorist attacks. I was. It's extraordinary that you were in Fort Worth, saw the president up close on the day of the assassination, and were then in New York covering the falling Twin Towers. Now, was it a similar type of emotional experience, the assassination in 9/11?
No. 9/11, it put a fear in me. I know that there was a lot of fear when when President Kennedy was assassinated. There was a fear initially that I had to been a Soviet, and we're talking about we're going to have World War III. We just come off the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the president had President Kennedy backed a plan that had already been in place to knock off Castro. So there's all kinds, and Johnson I think one of the reasons why even to this day there's some records that have still been sealed. I truly believe that President Johnson, who ordered those records sealed, believed that, and I don't know what was in them, but I believe that he felt like that they could start a world war, and that it would be better for those secrets to to stay secret till my generation had passed on than it would be to lose numerous American lives and lives all over the world in a resulting war. I truly believe that was one of the reasons why he wanted one thing sealed. But we know most of it now.
Yeah.
No.
But 9/11 was a very different kind of.
Well, I was scared. I say I was scared. I was producing the election coverage. Mayor Giuliani had been term limited out, and the polls opened in New York City at 6:30 that morning. And I'd gone in. I was the executive producer over the political unit, and I'd gone in, and I'm in my office at Rockefeller Plaza, and I turn on the monitor in my office, and I see one of our tower cams punched up. There's a little wisp of smoke coming out of one of the towers. I turn it up, and Jane Hansen saying a plane has hit one of the towers, and I'm thinking, that was one of these crazy New York things, a little Piper Cub or something, you know. Well, I ran down the newsroom by the time I saw the second one hit, and then I saw the Pentagon. And what was scary about that was that while as a junior in high school, I wasn't so worried about a world war at that young age. I guess I thought I'd live forever and everything would be fine. But by that time, I had a wife that worked down on 23rd Street who was closer to the towers than I was, and I was fearful for her life until I actually got a hold of her. I was a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, it was more immediate to you than the assassination.
And now after, it's unbelievable. I mean, the first time we'd ever been attacked on the continent of the United States, and it was a little bit different feeling.
You were back here in Texas, in Dallas, for the 50th anniversary in
Sure.
2013. And I'm going to put this up on the screen. You were with a network or a station called KTXD, and you did 12 hours of live coverage on the 50th anniversary, and you were on air for much of that. Tell me a little bit about that 12-hour live coverage.
Well, a bunch of us old guys, this was an independent station that got a bunch of our local anchors from the heydays of the 70s and 80s, and we did this daily newscast. And so the station manager said, well, we got the assassination coming up. Can you do something for us? And I said, oh, yeah. So he said, well, I want to make it big. So we went on from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. that night. We did the live pickup for 1 hour at noon of the ceremony right across the street in Dealey Plaza. But I took a lot of the footage that in cooperation with the sixth floor, footage I was already very familiar with. Didn't have the rights to it, but you all did, and we worked out a deal where you gave us permission, and you didn't have to really dig most of it up because I had my own pirated copies of it, but. Well, the truth be known, but I couldn't do anything with them other than enjoy them at home, I guess. But at any rate, without your cooperation, none of it could have happened. But we brought in people. We brought in the guy that drove Oswald to work that day. What was his name? Weird guy.
Wesley Frazier.
Yeah, Buell Wesley Frazier. Oh my word. We brought in, and he tells his story about the curtain rods that Oswald had in the back seat of the car, and about how his poor car couldn't start, and why he thought it was a carburetor, but maybe it wasn't a carburetor, maybe it was something else. I mean, the guy was. But we interviewed different people, and many of you have heard this 7 degrees to Kevin Bacon or whatever. You mentioned that I was in 9/11 and the assassination. Well, Jim Lavelle, the man in the white cowboy hat that you see in the picture where Ruby shoots Oswald. Well, Jim, of course, was there when Oswald got shot, but Jim was at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So, we joke sometimes. I say, well, we're the Forrest Gump of real life, Jim, I guess. I don't know, but.
But it brought you full circle from being there with your trumpet in the ballroom at the Hotel Texas to broadcasting 12 hours, 50 years to the day later.
But I relied on these personal contacts. I got Mr. Martin. I got some of the band guys talk about their things. I had a girlfriend in high school. Her daddy, Patty Grudy, her dad was the undertaker that. It was stuffed Oswald. I mean, he was and then he presided over the exhumation. And Paul was a wild guy. And Paul was dead, but Patty came in. So I used all these contacts, and along with the old footage, and we did 12 hours of coverage.
Wow, that's remarkable. I remember, and you can still see, I think, bits and pieces of it on YouTube if you look it up.
I've got all that stuff.
Yeah. I want to turn it over in the time we have left, a little Q&A, so that you guys have a chance to ask John some questions. So just let's talk about what you want to talk about for a few minutes.
thought of what was said about the cowboy boots at breakfast regarding protecting.
The cowboy boots and the cowboy hat.
Oh, okay. Well, Johnson was a big personified Texana, so he gave they gave the president some cowboy boots and a cowboy hat, and the president would not. I mean, Jackie said all these trends for ladies, but the president Kennedy would never wear a hat, and up until that time, men wore hats outdoors, and so he kind of hesitates when they give him the hat, and he starts to put it on. He says, "No, you come up to the White House on Monday, and I'll wear it for you there," or something, but it was a typical. John Justin had been the former mayor, Justin Boot Company, so they were Justin Boots, and so they gave him, and they made a joke about how they were going down to the LBJ range. They never got down there for that peace talk with Connally and Yarborough, but saying, well, it'll keep you from being bit by the rattlesnakes and all. So, but that's Texan. I mean, we're proud of our culture. I mean, you call, Fort Worth is still called Cowtown. My grandfather laid the bricks on Exchange Avenue on the north side there where the packing houses are. I mean, we're proud of being cowboys.
And there were some Western saddles for the two kids waiting at the
That's
Dallas
right.
trademark.
That's right.
That were going to be presented at the Dallas luncheon, and that of course never happened.
Yep.
Other questions you have for John Sparks? Surely someone wants to ask what he believes about Oswald and the conspiracy. Go ahead, ma'am.
I was going to ask about in the last two previous what do we call these talks? They were talking about the relationship between the media and the police, and it seemed pretty cozy at the time. And you became a journalist in the 70s. So did you see that role change over the years? There's sort of a little bit more animosity between the police and the journalists.
It's changed, and I mean, if you fast forward today, it's completely changed. It was cozy back in those days, and it was I mean, it changed. Things started being different, and yet we had a very famous murder trial down here. There was a millionaire named Cullen Davis that in Fort Worth that was at a big sensational murder trial and was acquitted of killing his stepdaughter and another man. But Cullen, every day at the trial, he'd walk in, and the photographers would all take his pictures. And they would joke back and forth. Even, I mean, here, he said, "Well, you take my picture again." And he said, "Well, Cullen, if you wear the same suit every day, we just re-rack the film, And so there's a relationship between the cops too. But if you look at it today, everything is very controlled now. Used to be, even in sporting events, we'd go in and you get the guys in the clubhouse after the game, but everything's orchestrated now. They don't, you can't just have the access. Even in political events, everything is controlled. Access is controlled, and that's the other extreme of it. And maybe it was a little too cozy, but I don't know. There's got to be a better happy medium in between, I think. Personal opinion.
Good question.
I've got a question. How old were you when you were playing your trumpet?
Well, let's see. I was a junior in high school. That would have been 63. I was born in July of 47, so 16. I am 16, going on 17.
Yeah, those are the days. So I just was wondering, at 16, would you have been really you probably didn't even think of conspiracy and things like that, but as you grew into the news business, and all the stories that were starting to come out and conspiracies and the documentaries, did you start to think about it?
In other words, I started thinking about the conspiracy stuff.
Yeah, as you got older.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you couldn't escape it. I mean, it was talked about, and I've done a lot of studying about it. The late Gary Mack, who worked at the 6th floor here, was a dear friend, and he started out being probably one of the ringleaders of what we would call the conspiracy bunch, if you will. My personal belief is that the planets just aligned. I think it was just. I think you can't make stuff up like this, but I think that Lee Oswald. I think first of all, the whole thing that set it in motion was the fact that they did not pre-interview Oswald when the president was making the trip. they knew where these people were in town. People like Oswald that had, and they would go around, find out where they were, interview them, and make sure that they knew exactly where they were every minute while the president was in town. Oswald slipped through the cracks. It didn't happen. So that enabled Oswald to, and I think by the luck of the draw, he gets a job here at the depository. I mean, he worked all kinds of different odd job stuff. I don't think he got the job. I do know this. He wanted to assassinate the president. I mean, Bob Gemberling, the FBI guy that did the lion's share of the investigation, he had a friend in the CIA, and Oswald went down to the Soviet embassy in Mexico City and told the Soviets that he would kill President Kennedy, and they laughed at Oswald and said, "Well, yeah, sure, go ahead and try." But they did. I mean, they thought he was a nutcase. And I truly think that Oswald wanted to be a somebody, and he got the opportunity. Jack Ruby was another person we were talking about before the broadcast here, that he wanted to be a somebody. And so after the president got killed, I mean, he was an emotional basket case, and he felt for Mrs. Kennedy, but he was going to right that wrong. And I don't buy into the conspiracy. I've read the Mark Lane, the Magic Bullet. The one thing we did a story a few years ago. What was the fellow's name out of Baltimore that said that the missing shot was the first one that hit the light standard?
Max Holland.
Yeah, Max Holland. Yeah, and I went even up to the city. The story was that the missing bullet was the first one that Oswald got buck fever. You know, when you shoot and going deer hunting, and that he got so excited when the car pulled around the corner from Houston on the Elm that he actually hit the top of the traffic signal. Mm-hmm. And so we went and tried to see if the city had any records of when it had been replaced, or if we could find, go up there and try to see if we could find lead there on the top of the traffic signal and all. There's a guy named Penn Jones in the Midlothian paper, and he would take tourists through Dealey Plaza, and he'd say, "Well, here's where gunman number 8 was. He was down in the sewer," and all this stuff. I don't buy the badge man stuff either. I think there are a lot of people that want to have explanations for some of this stuff. I just don't think it's there.
I did see a thing on YouTube about a man who was deaf, and
Ed Hoffman.
yeah. And he, said he was on some bridge or something, and he could see somebody behind the fence with a gun, and saw him shoot, and saw him pull the gun, blah, blah, blah.
Gary Mack there's a footage, some footage. It's 8mm, and you'll know the name of it, what you old guys call it. But it shows a wide shot of the depository, and Gary swore that you can see a little speck going from down the hallway here to this.
Robert Hughes.
Yeah, and I said, Gary, come on. I mean, 8mm film is 8mm wide. That's a piece of dust or something you're looking at, and I truly. I think Oswald did it. I think he did it by himself. I think he wanted to be a big shot. His brother has said that he thought Castro was going to invite him to come to Cuba and he'd be a national hero. He always wanted to be a big shot, and I believe that through an uncanny series of circumstances, it happened.
You mentioned Ed Hoffman, just to clarify that, one of the problems that has been raised with Mr. Hoffman's story, he's deceased now, but he didn't come forward for many years, for decades after the assassination. And any time an eyewitness comes forward 15, 20 years later, it always makes their story more skeptical, especially if it's a rather explosive account that they actually saw someone firing a shot from the grassy knoll. There's also, as I recall, an issue about where he said he was standing and what his perspective would have actually been in 1963 versus when he took book authors and documentarians up there in the 1980s. There are some problems with Mr. Hoffman's story, although there are plenty of people out there that believe he did see something, but he was just ignored because he was a deaf mute and unable to communicate effectively at the time. But it's one of those things. For every eyewitness, there's always going to be two perspectives, two camps, as far as what you believe and if you're skeptical. But that's really all the time we have tonight. We're going to be back next week for our last installment, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this building and the history of the museum, and also take whatever questions you have about this subject. But I hope you'll join me in thanking John Sparks for being our guest speaker tonight. This has been fantastic.
Thank you for letting me visit with you. I appreciate y'all are up in Ontario. Is that right? Y'all Toronto Blue Jay fans?
Is it snowing up there? Oh wow!
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. But well, thank you for letting me tell you some of my war stories. I enjoyed it.
All right, folks. We'll see some of you next week. I hope. Take care.
Bye.